The wilderness called to me, as it always does, with its promise of solitude and untamed beauty. I set out on a multi-day solo hike, eager to leave behind the chaos of modern life and immerse myself in nature's embrace. The first day went smoothly, the miles passing beneath my feet as I breathed in the crisp mountain air, relishing the burn in my muscles and the quiet of the forest. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and pink on the second day, I stumbled upon a small campsite nestled in a clearing. A man, perhaps a few years older than myself, sat by a crackling fire, his weathered face illuminated by the dancing flames. He looked up as I approached, a friendly smile spreading across his features. "Evening," he called out, gesturing for me to join him. "I'm Jack. You're welcome to share my campsite if you'd like. It's always nice to have some company out here." I hesitated for a moment, weighing the offer. I had planned on camping alone, but the prospect of a warm fire and some conversation was tempting after a long day of hiking. "Thanks," I said, dropping my pack and settling down across from him. "I'm Ethan." We fell into easy conversation, swapping tales of our hiking adventures and marveling at the beauty of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Jack. He seemed to know a little too much about me, casually mentioning details about my life that I couldn't remember sharing. "You've always been afraid of the dark, haven't you, Ethan?" Jack asked, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Ever since you were a kid and your older brother locked you in that closet overnight as a prank." I felt my blood run cold. How could he possibly know about that? I had never told anyone about that childhood trauma, not even my closest friends. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. Jack just smiled, a knowing look on his face. "You don't have to pretend with me, Ethan. I know all about your fears, your insecurities, the things that keep you up at night, the monsters that lurk in the shadows of your mind." I stood up abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. "I think I should go," I said, reaching for my backpack. "Thanks for the company, but I really should find my own campsite." Jack shrugged, leaning back against a log. "Suit yourself," he said, his voice taking on a mocking edge. "But you can't run from your fears forever, Ethan. They have a way of catching up with you, especially out here in the wild." I turned and fled into the darkness, Jack's laughter echoing behind me. I stumbled through the underbrush, my mind racing with questions and a growing sense of unease. How did Jack know so much about me, and what did he mean about my fears catching up with me? I finally stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a gnarled tree trunk. The forest was pitch black around me, the only sound the hammering of my own heart in my ears. I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself down. Then I heard it. A low growl, like nothing I had ever heard before. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, echoing through the trees. I spun around, searching frantically for the source of the noise, but I could see nothing in the darkness. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the shadows, staring straight at me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The eyes moved closer, and I could see the outline of a massive, hulking shape like something out of my worst nightmares. I turned and ran, blind panic overtaking me. I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind me, its growls growing louder with each passing second. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing to the forest floor in a heap. And there, in the darkness, I waited for the monster to catch me, Jack's words echoing in my mind. "You can't run from your fears forever, Ethan. They have a way of catching up with you." I woke up gasping, my heart pounding in my chest. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I had gotten there. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. The strange encounter with Jack, the glowing red eyes in the darkness, the monster chasing me through the woods. I sat up, wincing at the stiffness in my muscles. I must have passed out from exhaustion after running blindly through the forest. But where was my backpack? I looked around, but it was nowhere to be seen. A sense of unease crept over me as I realized that Jack was gone too. I struggled to my feet, determined to find my belongings and get out of these woods as quickly as possible. But as I started to walk, I realized that something was very wrong. The trees around me seemed to shift and change, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. The ground beneath my feet felt spongy and unsteady, like I was walking on a bed of moss. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a tree. It was my childhood bully, Tom. His face contorted into a cruel sneer. "Well, well, well," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Look who it is, little Ethan, all alone in the woods." I stumbled backward, my heart racing. This couldn't be real. Tom lived on the other side of the country now. There was no way he could be here. But as he advanced on me, his fists clenched, I could feel the old fear rising up inside me, just as it had when I was a kid. I turned to run, but found myself face to face with another apparition. A monstrous creature with razor-sharp claws and fangs dripping with saliva. It was the same creature that had chased me through the woods last night, but now it was even more terrifying in the daylight. I looked around frantically for an escape route, but everywhere I turned, there was another horror waiting for me. A creepy clown with a hungry look in its eyes, a swarm of spiders crawling up my legs, a dark figure with glowing red eyes reaching out to grab me. And then, through the haze of terror, I heard a familiar laugh. Jack stepped out from behind a tree, his eyes glinting with malice. "Having fun yet, Ethan?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I told you your fears would catch up with you." I stared at him in horror as realization dawned on me. "You're doing this," I whispered. "You're making me see these things." Jack grinned, his face starting to shift and change before my eyes. "Clever boy," he said, his voice taking on an inhuman quality. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually." I watched in fascinated horror as Jack's body twisted and morphed, taking on the appearance of the monstrous creature that had chased me through the woods. "What are you?" I breathed, my voice trembling. "I'm a shapeshifter," Jack said, his words distorted by the fangs growing in his mouth. "I feed on fear, and you, Ethan, are a delicious meal." He lunged at me, his claws outstretched. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and falling to the ground. Jack loomed over me, his hot breath washing over my face. "You can't escape me," he growled. "I am your worst nightmares come to life." I closed my eyes, waiting for the feeling of claws tearing into my flesh. But instead, I heard a yelp of pain. My eyes flew open to see Jack stumbling backward, clutching at his face. And there, standing over me, was a figure I had never expected to see. Tom, my childhood bully, holding a burning branch from the campfire. Tom reached down and hauled me to my feet. "Come on," he said urgently. "We need to get out of here before he recovers." I stared at him in shock, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was no time for questions. Together, Tom and I ran through the shifting, nightmarish landscape of the forest, Jack's enraged howls echoing behind us. We ran until the woods began to thin out, the sun's rays breaking through the canopy. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the nightmare was over. The forest was just a forest again. The monsters nothing more than shadows in my mind. I turned to thank Tom, but he was gone. Had he ever really been there at all? Or was he just another manifestation of my fears conjured up by Jack to torment me? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had to confront Jack, to put an end to his reign of terror before he could prey on anyone else. But how could I defeat a creature that could become my darkest fears? As I stood there, lost in thought, a cold wind blew through the trees, carrying with it the sound of Jack's mocking laughter. "You can't hide from me forever, Ethan," he whispered. "I'll always be waiting in the shadows, ready to feast on your fear." I shivered, knowing that he was right. If I wanted to be free of him, I would have to face my fears head on. But first, I needed a plan. I stumbled through the forest, my mind racing as I tried to come up with a plan to defeat Jack. I knew that I couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, he would catch up with me, and I would be at his mercy once again. But how could I fight a creature that could become my deepest fears? How could I stand against the monsters that lurked in the darkest corners of my mind? As I walked, I thought back to something my therapist had told me years ago, when I was struggling with crippling anxiety and fear. The only way to overcome your fears is to face them, she had said. You have to confront them head-on and show them that they don't control you. At the time, I had dismissed her words as nothing more than a cliché. But now, lost in this nightmarish landscape, I realized that she had been right all along. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I pictured Jack in my mind, shifting and changing into all the things that terrified me most. The darkness, the monsters, the bullies who had tormented me as a child. And then, I imagined myself standing tall in the face of those fears, refusing to back down. I saw myself facing them head-on, laughing in the face of my own terror. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I had to do. I made my way back to the campsite where I had first met Jack, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that he would be waiting for me there, ready to feed on my fear once again. As I stepped into the clearing, I saw him sitting by the campfire, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Back for more, Ethan?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked towards him, my eyes locked on his. I could feel the fear rising up inside me, but I pushed it down, refusing to let it control me. Jack's smile faltered as I approached, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tinged with nervousness. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Jack," I said, my voice steady and strong. "You have no power over me." Jack's face contorted with rage, and he lunged at me, his body shifting and changing into a monstrous form. But this time, I was ready for him. I dodged his attack. Rolling to the side and coming up on my feet, I grabbed a burning branch from the campfire and swung it at him, the flames searing his flesh. Jack howled in pain, stumbling backwards, but he wasn't done yet. He shifted again, becoming a towering, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes, the embodiment of my deepest fears. For a moment, I faltered, my courage wavering in the face of this terrifying apparition. But then, I remembered the strength that I had found within myself. I charged at the shadow, my burning branch held high. I swung it with all my might, the flames cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. The shadow let out an unearthly shriek, its form dissipating like smoke in the wind. And then, it was gone, leaving only Jack in its place, his face twisted with pain and fear. I stood over him, my eyes blazing with determination. "It's over, Jack," I said, my voice filled with a newfound strength. "You have no power over me anymore." Jack looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, and then he began to laugh. A long, horrifying cackle that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you've won?" he gasped, his voice ragged and broken. "You think you've defeated your fears? You fool! Your fears will always be a part of you, lurking in the shadows of your mind. And one day, they will consume you, just as they consumed me." With a final, shuddering breath, Jack closed his eyes, his body going still. I stood there for a long moment, staring down at his lifeless form. I knew that he was right. My fears would always be with me, a constant companion on my journey through life. But as I turned to leave the clearing, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. The shadows around me seemed to grow darker, more menacing, and then I heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, and there, emerging from the shadows, was a creature more terrifying than anything I had ever seen before. It was a twisted, misshapen thing, with razor-sharp claws and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly hunger. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with terror. I had thought that I had conquered my fears, but now I realized that I had only scratched the surface. There were depths of horror within me that I had never even imagined, and now they were rising up to consume me. The creature lunged at me, its claws tearing into my flesh. I screamed in agony, my blood splattering the forest floor. I tried to fight back, but it was no use. The creature was too strong, too fast, too powerful. As I lay there, my life ebbing away, I heard Jack's voice echoing in my mind. "I told you," he whispered, his tone filled with malicious glee. "Your fears will always be with you, and in the end, they will be your undoing." I closed my eyes, surrendering to the darkness that engulfed me. I had thought that I could conquer my fears, but in the end, they had conquered me. And as I slipped away into oblivion, I knew that Jack had been right all along. The monsters that lurked within us could never truly be defeated. They could only be held at bay, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the end, it was our own fears that destroyed us, and there was no escape from the nightmare that lived within.